If you're working on a grant proposal for your nonprofit and you want to make sure that you actually win, there is one thing you must have in any of those proposals, and we're going to talk about it in this video. So the one thing you need to have in every grant proposal that you're writing or any grant application is data or data, however people want to say it. I say data. But I'm going to actually break down the types of data you should have in your proposal and how to use it to make a more effective case for your nonprofit. If you don't know me, I'm Tiffany with Boss on a Budget. I help people start their nonprofits and I teach people how to raise money from the ground up. So there are two types of data you should be concerned about when you're writing your grant proposal. The first type is qualitative data and the second is quantitative. I'm going to break down qualitative first because that's the simplest, and then we're actually going to break down quantitative together. So for qualitative data, it just means non-numeric data. It's typically more narrative or story-based data. You should be collecting stories about your nonprofit, about your nonprofit's impact, to be used as inspiration and also as evidence for the work of your programs when it's appropriate. And let me say a caveat to this: every grant funder is different and what they expect of you and what they require is going to be different. But this is general information that you should know no matter what kind of grant you're writing. So you should be collecting stories about people who have experienced your programming. And those stories can be collected from the people who experience the program directly or the people who are administering the program, like your volunteers, your staff, or even yourself if you're the founder. But you should make a regular practice of collecting stories, quotes, and information that people give you as feedback to the work you've done. Why is that important? Obviously, because you're trying to make the case in a grant proposal that you should be funded. So you're making the case that your services are essential, that they're needed, and that if people don't have them, they're doing without. And so in those stories, people can explain where they were when they didn't have your services and the impact and the change that occurred as a result of your services, further proving the point that without your organization, then they wouldn't be able to see the success that they were able to see. You should make it a regular practice to collect stories at certain times during the year. Let's say at least twice a year. Put it in a regular practice to follow up with people who received your services. So you can do that through surveys, through one-on-one interviews. You can do them on the phone or over Zoom or some kind of online video conferencing system. You could do focus groups where you do groups of people and you get group feedback. Just make sure you're collecting detailed notes so that you can pull out good information about people's experiences and also good quotes. And the last thing I'll say is when you are fundraising, you're fundraising and appealing to people. You're not appealing to buildings or organizations. You're actually appealing to people who are reading the material. So if you want people to pay attention, if you want people to be engaged in whatever you're writing or whatever you want them to pay attention to, then you have to use stories, you have to use quotes when appropriate in order to liven up your narrative. Okay, so now let's talk about quantitative data, which is going to take me a little bit to break down, but just stay with me. So quantitative data is what we normally associate with the word data, which is just numbers. But there are multiple ways you can collect numbers and collect information about your program that should be used in your grant proposals and in your grant applications. So first of all, there's primary data and then there's secondary data. Primary data is data that you actually collect yourself. So if you have a survey or you're doing a program evaluation on your program and you're collecting that data directly from your participants, then that's your data that you own, and that's typically called primary data. Secondary data are data that someone else collects, but it's still useful for your purposes in order to make the case for your program. And that may be other research studies that people have done, that may be statistics that perhaps a government agency collects on the population that you serve. So primary and secondary data both have an important purpose for you using data for your proposals, and you can use them in these 4 ways that I'm about to break down right now. The first way you can use this quantitative data is by sharing demographic data about your population that you serve. So when I say demographic data, I just mean data that describe the people who you serve. There are characteristic data. There are things like age, things like socioeconomic status, gender, race. whatever applies to your program. There are some standard demographic data that you should always collect, like age, race, gender, so that you can help understand who you serve and see if there are different experiences by different types of people. So there are standard things that you should always collect, but there are also other important things related to the kind of work that you do that you may want to collect that's related to the characteristics or demographics of who you serve. You may want to collect the grade that they're in. You may want to collect their zip code that they live in. It just all depends on the information that you need to be able to make the case for your program. So you can collect some of that demographic data directly from your participants, or if you don't have that information, or for example, you're a new program and you need to describe who you serve, but you haven't served anybody yet, you can still collect demographic data on your target population. And you can say things like, the population we want to serve typically look like this. They typically have this profile. Here's an example. So I have a background in child welfare, particularly around kinship care. Kinship care is a practice where relatives assume the care of their loved ones when their parents aren't able to. So when grandma or auntie begins to care for their grandchild or their nephew, niece, that's officially called kinship care in some spaces. Well, data have been collected on kinship care providers, which show that a lot of them are on fixed income, a lot of them live in impoverished areas, a lot of them aren't employed because they're older, and a lot of them are older and tend to be grandparents and even great grandparents. That's demographic data that describe the population that you can use to talk about who you want to serve if you are designing a new program. And even if you have limited data already, you can still supplement what you have with demographic data that someone else has collected. Second kind of information that you want to have on hand is data or information that justify the need for your program. In most grant proposals, you're going to see a section that talks about either the need statement or the problem statement, or you may see a question that says, why is your program needed? It's going to be stated similarly to that. And this is where you need to make the point of why your program should exist, and you should be using data to back that up. Most issues that we're seeing today are not new. So that means that people have studied the issue. They've studied why it exists. They've studied the root causes. They studied trends over time to see what's happened and how it's evolved. That's the kind of information you should use to strengthen your point as to why your program is needed. So when you're writing a grant application, it's not enough to tell people, well, we're needed because we provide such a good service. Grant funders are trying to make a decision about how to leverage their funding. And even though to you, it may seem like they have a limitless amount of funding, they actually don't. So they have to be judicious about how they spend their money, and they want to leverage their money. So they may be assessing the problem that you solve and say, well, it's not that big of an issue. We want to work with programs that are really solving the issues either that we care most about or where we feel our money is making the most impact. So if you're showing that there is a deep problem that people are not paying attention to, or that's an issue that people may not realize, then it may convince them to say, oh, we should be investing our money here because this is a serious problem. So you have to explain why it's a problem, and you can use data to do that. You can use, again, primary data you collect yourself, where you can collect from participants how they describe what they're going through. You may have done an interview with young folks that you're working with, and they just describe what it's like to grow up in a house where they experienced trauma. And they can talk about how at a later age it impeded or hindered them from certain things. So you can talk about the information you may have collected from people you've worked with, but you can also show the data that says people who have traumatic experiences in childhood, they have horrible outcomes later in life. They have horrible health outcomes. They have horrible mental health outcomes. So you can use data to make that case so that a funder feels like if they don't fund you, it would be a mistake. The third type of data are data about the solution. So what works? What has proven to work in your particular industry or with your particular population? As I said before, most things are not new. So somebody somewhere has studied them or has some kind of information about what works for different types of programming. One example is the mentoring space. There is a ton of data on mentoring and mentoring programs and what works. And the great thing about it is that they've been studying it for years. So there are a lot of data that show over time, over literally 20 years, what mentoring can do for a child. So if you have a mentoring program, you should be pulling that data. And when you're describing what you do, you can say, well, studies have shown that when young people have a one-on-one mentor that works with them at least once a month, their education outcomes improve, or they're more likely to graduate high school, more likely to have a successful life. Whatever it is, whatever the research has shown, it's really important for you to connect that. Because it's one thing for you to say, well, we believe that if we do this, this will happen. But it's a whole other thing to say, this has been proven over and over again in studies that this works. And so that's why we chose to do our program this way. So again, everything comes back to you proving why the money you're asking for and putting it into your program, why it would be a great thing for the people that you serve. And then finally, number 4 is your actual results. So for some people watching this, you may not have initiated a program yet. So you may not have a lot of data or any data at all that show what works in your program, that shows what has been effective in the work that you do. But some of you have been doing this for quite a while, and you have information and data that show how you're successful, and sometimes even why you're successful. So the first thing is you should be collecting data out the gate. You should be collecting what's called baseline data to show where your participants are at the moment you first meet them. And then at some time point after getting your services, you should be measuring what changed, what differed, what happened as a result of your program. And the idea is that you want to show in numbers, but also in people's feedback and experiences, what changed for them in a positive way. And you want to measure that in a standard way to show that we not only did that for one person, we did that for 50 people, or we did that for 90% of the people that we serve. So it's important that you collect data on a regular basis and track to show what your results are. Once you have those results, you absolutely need to put them in a grant proposal, because again, it's one thing to show what research has shown, but it's a whole other thing to show that you saw results too. That just strengthens the case that you're trying to make when you're asking for funding from a grant funder. So it's important for you to be collecting data, but use the results from your programming. Show what happened, show what worked. And even if you feel like there wasn't much that happened, you still need to show some kind of change. You still need to show something that's different, and you need to have a standard set of outcomes that you're measuring so you can track that over time and show people this is how and this is why we are effective. So as I've done this video, you've heard me say a phrase a couple of times: make the case. You are making the case. So when you're writing a grant proposal, just remember, you are forming a case. You are creating an argument, a persuasive argument for why this funder should fund you. And keep in mind why this funder should fund you and not fund other people who are also asking for money, because you don't operate in a bubble. There are other people or other organizations who need the money as well. So you have to be in the mindset that you have to make the case. And the way you make the case strongly is with data. And that's everything that I've talked about in this video. I hope this information has helped. If you need to know about grant opportunities that are in your area, or just grant opportunities that are out there, comment grants worksheet below, because I created a free method for you to find grant opportunities for yourself. But also when you download that, you'll be added to my list where I send free grant opportunities every Friday afternoon. So if you're interested in that, comment grants worksheet below. Thank you so much for watching. If you have other questions about grants or ideas for other videos, please drop them in the comments below, and also add your comments about the kind of data that you use or questions about data that you use. Thank you so much for watching the video. If you need help with your nonprofit, visit me at bossonabudget.com, and I'll see y'all in the next video.